Hey, it's your boy Pharrell. I'm a huge fan of Tim Graham and Friends. Then again, who isn't? Shake it, ooh.
CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
And now, back to the man who puts the heart in shart. It's Tim Graham and Friends.
It's Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic from my undisclosed location, joined as always by Jonah Bronstein in North Buffalo. Is it North Buffalo or is it Kenmore?
North Buffalo for now.
Why? Is there eminent domain going on, or?
Pangea, have you heard of that, where the continents spread apart and they change places?
Are you thinking about moving, Jonah?
I'm moving. I don't know
you
how
are.
much thought I had to put into it, but my landlord, Kevin Adams, is evicting me to move in with his dog, who doesn't get along with his mom's dog. So I'm on the move in about a week or so, and then probably moving again, because I'm moving to a temporary location and then looking for a maybe a more permanent location after that.
Oh, that sucks to have to move twice.
Well, it would suck less if I didn't have my whole family involved and this wasn't a giant group project and all the although actually I appreciate the help I'm getting, but all the added mental stress and gymnastics that's going into it.
You mentioned your landlord, Kevin Adams. For those who may be listening and wondering if you're being sarcastic or literal, it's not the former Sabres general manager, Kevin Adams.
No, that's a pseudonym I use for my landlord. I don't want to use his real name. That's a callback. I don't know how many listeners remember that a few months back we were talking
I don't
about.
remember it.
Yeah, I had a surprise. My landlord moving in with me for a couple of weeks.
Right. Okay, yes. And it happened when Kevin Adams got fired. And okay, yes, it went over my head. I'm sorry.
It's been a running joke on the show that I think I'm the only one that remembers. But
all right. Well, good luck in your relocation. Maybe you'll be joining me from your own undisclosed location for a little while, and we'll both be podcasting from our bunkers.
Yeah, I'll probably disclose my locations, and hopefully we can have some fun with some of the props involved with that. But we'll see how that goes.
Jonah, I wrote a column today for The Athletic that the Bills, now through the most significant portion of free agency, where you get the players that are going to make the biggest difference, really seemed to me to be an awful lot like, wait, did I say the Sabres?
No, you said Bills.
Did I say, oh, all right. My brain went on autopilot there for a little bit. You may be able to tell from my stuffiness and my hoarseness that I got another bug. I think it still comes from the WGR studios. I think that place is a incubator of sickness.
I heard there's an infected microphone.
I think they are. Somebody was talking about it on the air earlier today about all the people who are still getting sick, and it's like a rotation. Anyways, so I'm sick again, and I'm on NyQuil. I'm a little foggy. I was having a discussion with somebody earlier today and really having trouble recalling very simple things, people's names and whatever. So anyway, I thought I may have said, anyways, I wrote a column today at The Athletic about the Bills and their off season so far. And yes, they've gotten Bradley Chubb and they've gotten CJ Gardner-Johnson. His name doesn't just roll off the tongue. We're going to need to condition ourselves to say CJ Gardner-Johnson.
CJ GJ.
much like, Uko Pekka Gardner-Johnson. And the trade for DJ Moore, much easier to say. The re-signing of Connor McGovern. So there are a lot of good things that have happened. But to me, this roster doesn't seem appreciably different than the one that hasn't gotten it done the last couple of years. Yes, the DJ Moore acquisition is an upgrade, and he's the best receiver the Bills have had since Stephon Diggs. But to me, this is still just, we're going to bank on Josh Allen and hope we can do enough around him to get it all done. And I've gotten a lot of positive feedback about that column, people who agree with me. But the people who disagree with me are angry. They're much angrier with my premise than people are saying, yeah, that's true. It's not like, thank you for saying this, Tim. I agree with you. It is more like, yeah, that tracks. And then the people who disagree with it really disagree with it. They think that the Bills just are on vibes, really. I mean, it's really all we have right now. To be optimistic about the 2026 Bills really is just vibes, because you don't know what the first-time head coach, who's also going to call the plays that a lot of fans weren't too thrilled with when he was just the offensive coordinator, and the first-time NFL defensive coordinator are going to do, and how they're going to make things different. So I just find it interesting. I guess I'm leaving it with you, Jonah, is where you think of the team's identity and if their roster makeup or their approach to things have altered or given you any kind of optimism that this team will get beyond Terry Pagula's proverbial playoff wall.
Well, there's a few things to react to there. I don't know. I'd have to really break it down, and I think it's way too early to say if this team's how far they're going to go in next year's playoffs. I'm thinking about the Stanley Cup playoffs right now a lot, and the NLL playoffs. There's a lot of time before we get to the NFL season even starting, much less the postseason. But I do think if you're optimistic about the Bills, it has a lot to do with the fact that they uh, brought back most of the team. They didn't have to make too many salary cap casualty cuts, and this is a team that won 12 games last year, went to the divisional playoffs, was various top five or so in power ratings and things like that, and was even better years before that. And yes, they did make a significant coaching change and going to have new schemes and adjustments, but it's still largely the same team with the most important player intact. It's been one of the better teams in the league, so I don't think they're going to fall off too much. As far as the offseason and free agency, they got a pretty good player to address what many believe was their biggest need, needing a number one wide receiver. Uh, I don't know if Bradley Chubb is an excellent player or even an upgrade from Joey Bosa, but a better fit maybe for Jim Leonard's defense and a pretty solid free agent acquisition. Overall, it seems like they didn't get much better, but they didn't get much worse in free agency. And considering they were up against the cap coming into the free agency period, the talent they were able to acquire with limited financial resources, I think they did pretty well there. So yeah, I don't know if the optimism or the pessimism has changed a whole lot from a month or so ago, but with a new coach and new systems and that kind of transition, it's hard to be too optimistic about the Bills taking that next step right away. It seems like maybe a 2-year process to do that.
Yeah, and there's a lot of, as you referred to, salary cap issues. The Dawson Knox restructure. They didn't want to keep Taron Johnson at that price, bringing in D. Alford instead, which is interchangeable, but D. Alford maybe does a couple of more aggressive type things. And that's where the vibes come in. I think that people look at CJ Gardner-Johnson and his aggressive ball hawking style, and D. Alford, the game against the Bills, he had an interception and a sack as a nickel cornerback. Those are things that go in the vibes category, though. We don't know if these, Jim Leonard can want to be as aggressive as he wants, but that doesn't mean it'll necessarily be effective. We can say from an observer standpoint that an aggressive defense will be more entertaining to watch probably than Sean McDermott's defense, but that doesn't mean they're going to make the stops and not get beaten deep and have broken coverages and all kinds of things that go along with being aggressive. There's a reason teams don't blitz all the time, and that some of the better teams in the NFL are, kind of conservative in some regards, wanting to stop the run, do some boring things. Boring defense is successful sometimes. Anyways, you mentioned the number one receiver aspect and DJ Moore, and I want to mention friend of the show Greg Gabriel, the Bishop Newman and Canisius College graduate who went on to win a couple of Super Bowl rings as a scout with the New York Giants and eventually became the Chicago Bears director of college scouting for 9 years. He's still based in Chicago, follows the Bears and the Bills quite closely. And he reached out to me unsolicited after the DJ Moore trade, and he texted me. I asked him if it was okay for me to quote this text, and he said it was. He wasn't just sending it to me. Well, he was sending it to me just to give me some insight. And just sometimes some people send me these texts and they want to be off the record. But Greg Gabriel said it was okay for me to share it. Bills got an excellent receiver in DJ, very tough, very competitive, great in the locker room, one of the best run after a catch receivers in the game. I'd be shocked if he doesn't have 100 plus catches for Buffalo. Had 4 seasons between 87 and 98 and never had a Josh Allen. Still very fast. He will be Allen's number one target. He'll do for the Bills what Diggs did, only he's tougher and 1,000 times better person. So I get that's Greg Gabriel with that last line mentioning that you won't have the drama or people getting tired of you despite your greatness, like the Bills did with Stephon Diggs and his death by 1,000 microaggressions. So, but does that unlock an offense? This offense to me has kind of been unlocked. I don't know what difference DJ Moore will make in terms of production and touchdowns. My guess, though, is that the touchdowns that he does score is going to come away from Josh Allen's touchdowns on runs or James Cook's, things like that. There is, it's not like he's just going to be, you're going to add 8 more touchdowns. His production, the ball can only go so many different places. But in situations, he is going to be able to get the key third down, score in the red zone, do all these other things in situations. I don't think it's really going to impact the Bills scoring that much, but it is going to impact the way that they keep the ball without punting or able to get the crucial catch when needed. That hasn't happened, especially in their last 3 elimination games when they had the ball with the chance to win the game or tie it and failed to do so. So I know that a lot of the blame has been on the defense, and I'm kind of all over the place here when I'm talking about it, but that's the thing to me where you still look at the defense and that doesn't seem like it got appreciably better. And if the big knock on the Bills was they had a defense that couldn't get it done, I still don't know. Are we relying on Ed Oliver being the elite Ed Oliver and not the inconsistent Ed Oliver? Who is going to play linebacker for the Bills? Terrell Bernard is back. Of course, he just was posting on social media images of his ankles that look like they've undergone some heavy duty surgery. And he's injury prone, or he has a long injury history already to begin with. Matt Milano is unsigned. Shaq Thompson is unsigned. Dorian Williams, how does he fit in Jim Leonard's system? So right now and I'll say regarding Bradley Chubb, I think he's an upgrade over Joey Bosa, but when you're talking about wins above replacement, how much I don't think it's a seismic difference from Joey Bosa to Bradley Chubb. Yes, he's going to be able to stop the run better than Joey Bosa did, but is 20 quarterback hits over the course of a season enough? You're talking about 1.1 a game or 1.2 a game. There are no game wreckers yet, and maybe some emerge through Jim Leonard's scheming. But right now, again, I keep coming back to that word. We're banking on vibes right now. If you think the Bills are going to do it, it's because you're buying into the vibes, because there is no tangible evidence yet. And I guess that's the NFL in March.
Yeah, well, those game wrecker players are hard to get. There's not very many of them. They are very expensive. Getting them on the trade market can cost several first-round picks. So I don't think there was much ability or a realistic expectation that the Bills could land too many of those players. Like maybe they could have gotten in on the Max Crosby trade, or I think they did try to sign Trey Hendrickson, but weren't the team that landed him or couldn't afford to meet his contract demands. But the Bills do have a game wrecker in Josh Allen, and there's only so many of them in the league. So when you have one, it's a little greedy to think you can have them all over the field at several different positions. And then back to DJ Moore, I think one thing you got to like about DJ Moore is that he's had success in the past with Joe Brady in Carolina. So Joe Brady knows how to put him into the right positions, and he probably believes in Joe Brady and his systems and his play calling. Uh, and that the fit will be better here than it was for DJ Moore last year in Ben Johnson's office in Chicago, which led to a reduction in his production. I don't know if DJ Moore is going to have, a career year statistically. Maybe he will, but I don't think with the trend of the everybody eats and the different players the Bills have and spreading the ball out and running the ball, that they're going to force feed the ball to DJ Moore. I think he's going to provide value in being a capable number one receiver, even if he's not a Pro Bowl caliber number one receiver, and that hopefully makes Joshua Palmer better on the other side, and Khalil Shakir better in the slot, and Dalton Kincaid better as a tight end, who's still a top target but not the number one target, and that the offense itself is better with a player like DJ Moore on the field. Less pressure on Keon Coleman. He can just be, a bit piece in the offense in his third year. Maybe he'll have a lot more success if they're not really counting on him to break out as a top receiving candidate, and that the offense overall is better. The defense, there's question marks, and linebacker is the biggest question mark, both with the scheme change, the fit, and just not having a lot of bodies there. Probably not re-signing Matt Milano and some of those guys. Terrell Bernard coming off a poor year in the injuries. He could be very good. He might be a fish out of water in Jim Leonard's defense and not have a true position. Joe Andreessen, we'll see if he's even, part of the equation, but he's probably on the team. It very well could be the position the Bills prioritize in the draft and get a potential game wrecker, or at least a very good linebacker at the bottom of the first round. But we don't know. I don't know if that player is there at that pick. The Bills no longer have a second round pick, so we'll see when they're able to draft for that position. But I do think the Bills have about the same overall talent on defense that they had a year ago, which wasn't quite good enough to be one of the best defenses in the league. And Sean McDermott's defense seemed to coach them up a little bit to be maybe top 10 caliber. So there are a lot of question marks to how this defense is going to be in year one under Jim Leonard with the players that they have. But I don't think it's going to crater out. They still have good players at various different levels of the defense.
No, I don't think they're going to crater either. Interesting what will happen at the other cornerback spot. Do they re-sign Tre'Davious White? Do they give him another run? Yeah, go ahead, Jonah.
Well, I would just say, as far as additions to the defense, I think Maxwell Harrison coming in healthy in his second year might be the biggest impact addition to the defense, even though he was on the team last year. And some of the other draft picks, Jackson's coming off an injury. We'll see how well he heals. But Landon Jackson, TJ Sanders, Deion Walker was a good player as a rookie, but these are players that were already on the team. But getting them in their second year, they might be a lot more upgrades than they were as rookies.
Yeah, I think it was encouraging that Brandon Beane, despite the salary cap restrictions, was in the discussions for Trey Hendrickson before he signed with the Baltimore Ravens. And I hadn't really heard any reporting at the time, but Mike Evans said that the Bills were, I think, his second team, or he was talking about really two teams that he wanted to go to, and it was San Francisco and Buffalo were the two teams that he mentioned. So, the fact that the Bills are trying to get things done, but they're not able to, and that's also been part of the story. That's part of the fabric of the Bills over the last couple of years, reminiscent of Brandon Beane at the trade deadline, talking about how he tried to get receivers, but he just couldn't get the deal done. It takes two to tango, and this isn't fantasy football, and all those phrases that he threw out there. And so while it is encouraging to hear that he is going after some of these headline players, but he's not getting them. Bradley Chubb, I like him as a player, but he's had 3 ACL injuries. one in high school, two in the NFL, and a really significant ankle injury. So he's a guy that, you hold your breath, and he's not quite as bad. He doesn't have the reputation as Joey Bosa from an injury standpoint, but to me, I think it's, going into the season with Gregory Rousseau and Bradley Chubb as your edge rushers is not that much different to me than going into a season with Gregory Rousseau and Joey Bosa. It doesn't scare me if I were an opposing offense. Now, of course, it's about scheme, and Jim Leonard wants to be aggressive, and Joe Brady talked about how he doesn't want to just make a quarterback afraid. He wants to make offensive coordinators afraid, and all the time, that's all, again, that's vibes. But if they're able to pull that off with this personnel, then great. And I think that will be the biggest improvement that we see in the Buffalo Bills, and that might be enough to make the difference. I'm just pessimistic that first-time coaches are going to get that done and are going to be able to figure it out on the fly. So yeah, I think that, but the Bills really stated, and we've talked about it on the podcast, and it gets talked about nationally. I hear it on podcasts and on the television, about what the standard is going to be for the Bills. Sean McDermott got to the second round of the playoffs and got to the AFC Championship game a couple of times, and it wasn't good enough. So does Joe Brady, as Terry Pagula said, we have to win the Super Bowl. So not this year, I'm guessing. But any slippage or any, learning on the job will not come with much patience from this fan base, I don't think.
With Bradley Chubb, I'm not as concerned about his health history because he, coming off that ACL injury, looked pretty healthy last year, had 8.5 sacks. He seems to be.
It would have led the Bills. It led the Dolphins. It would have led the Bills, which is, I think, a kind of a sad statement about Gregory Rousseau, but he was the leader. In fact, well, I don't have it in front of me, but I think Rousseau, since the Bills went with Sean McDermott and Brandon Beane in 2017, their sack leaders from that period of time, Jerry Hughes he ranks fourth on that list, and he hasn't played with them since 2021. That's quite a dip, when you're talking about consistent edge rush effectiveness when the Bills have sunk so much money into that position, whether it be through first, second, third round picks or in free agency.
Yeah. And, maybe there's some scheme adjustment, technique changes, utilization of these players, stunts, things like that open them up for more sacks. The Bills have, over the past few years, kind of rated out as a team that gets a lot of pressure on the quarterback and near sacks, but haven't finished for a lot of sacks all of the time, especially against good quarterbacks in crucial situations. But Ed Oliver might be playing 5 technique defensive end now. Maybe that unlocks some of his pass rushing ability. Ed Oliver really needs to stay healthy. That's the biggest thing with him. Greg Rousseau might be an edge rusher, outside linebacker now. He actually, at number 15, that might portend him changing to that position. Perhaps he's more effective in getting to the quarterback standing up than he was in the defensive line. And maybe some of these players aren't as capable in these positions as they were in the 4-3 positions in Sean McDermott's defense. I think it'll be a mix of both. But I think the overall talent is about the same, and it's on the coaches now to find the best way to utilize those players. And also, there's still a few signings to come, some bargain basement signings. I don't think they're going to bring back Shaq Thompson, but a Shaq Thompson type signing late in the offseason, a good player that they get off the street for cheap later on to plug and play a hole. I don't think they're going to go back to the well on guys like Jordan Poyer and Jordan Phillips, but those type of veterans on the practice squad that can maybe be useful pieces in the regular season. There's still more, I think, tinkering around the edges to do after the draft to make this defense into its final form, and it still could come into something effective by September.
It's interesting. I was taking a look at some various stories about draft capital rankings, and I heard Joe Marino on Eric Wood's podcasts mention, I think he said that the Bills have the second worst draft capital based on the those draft value charts, and a lot of people use the Fitzgerald Spielberger, which you'll see at Over the Cap, likes to use that. And it comes from a book that was a deep dive into NFL draft picks. And there used to be the Jimmy Johnson chart. That's outdated. A lot of people use the Fitzgerald Spielberger. And the Bills, because they don't have the second round pick and they're drafting late in every round because they're good, and they didn't get any compensatory picks, that they are somewhere between 30 and 32 in terms of their draft capital. So the ability to swing the team on the draft seems to be dubious. To 26th overall, the Bills have drafted in that spot before and not really come up with difference makers in that spot. Brandon Beane, regardless of what you think of him, his draft record is not great in the early rounds, finding immediate impact makers. I know I'm probably using phrases over and over again. I mean, yes, you get the Christian Benford occasionally, and you get the Khalil Shakir, but the guy who's going to cause major ripples in games, the guy who is going to put the Bills back on top in the AFC East, and they're probably not going to find that in the draft to do it in 2026. Maybe he turns into that player eventually, but chances are the Bills are just going to find pieces in the draft and not really starters or dudes that you can just plug in and watch them get to work on Sunday afternoons.
Well, I think it's a dangerous game to rely on your draft to help your immediate team. Rookies are a bit of a crapshoot, even the good ones. Getting good seasons out of them as rookies can be tough to rely on, and teams that do that usually aren't very good or are over-reliant on young players and rookies. It's not good for the Bills' long-term future that they don't have a lot of draft capital, as they try to assemble talent going into future off seasons. Looking back on a fruitless draft is usually where you find that things went wrong. But they do have a first round pick, and I think you can look at positions, linebacker probably being at the top of that list right now, where you think the Bills should pick that position to fill that spot, get Jim Leonard the player he needs. But where I believe Brandon Beane has erred in the first round over the last few years is being too hyper-focused on the immediate need and not just taking the best player available. And you can scratch off maybe quarterback and running back and a few other positions, even if you just say the best defensive player, which, they took a ton of defensive players last year. But I think just get the best player and figure out how he fits in later and assemble the roster over the years. And if you keep doing that year after year, you're going to have a good team. The Bills could have taken Carson Schlesinger last year in the first round, and he would have been exactly the linebacker that they need right now. Maybe he didn't fit perfectly into the defense last year, but had they taken him a year ago, they'd have an excellent piece in their linebacking corps right now. Not to say Maxwell Harrison wasn't a good pick, but going back, Khair Elam, they really needed a cornerback that year. They took him. He didn't really work out. Dalton Kincaid, Keon Coleman in different situations and mixed results with them, but you maybe could have gotten better players, especially when they drafted Keon Coleman, if you weren't as hyper fixated on that specific position. So the Bills do have a first round pick, and if they slot their board appropriately and grade these players and evaluate them well, they should be able to get a very good player in that first round. But maybe it's not at the position they need most pressingly. But I would say just take the best player you can get and work it out after you get the most talented players you can find.
CJ Gardner-Johnson is a fascinating player and one of those bargain bin type dudes that maybe Brandon Beane's able to dust off and get some serious production out of, like Rasul Douglas for a brief period. And there's been other guys that has been able to pick up and do some things with. But, fascinating. I'm sorry, I'm stuck on that word. Maybe it's my NyQuil, but he's 5 teams in a calendar year. The Eagles traded him last March. He goes to Houston. He plays 3 games, starts all 3 of them. They, for some reason, are done with him. They cut him. And then the Baltimore Ravens pick him up on the practice squad He lasts 2 weeks, doesn't get in a game. They cut him. The Chicago Bears pick him up, and he finishes the season there, gets some playoff run, and makes some plays. Starts 7 games in the regular season. Let me take a look. He started the Bears playoff game also, and they don't resign him. So the Bills get him, making him his 5th team in 366 days, I think it was exactly. So he's a prolific trash talker. He wears out his employers and his teammates about as much as the opposition, apparently, because he's a talented player. 6 interceptions, led the NFL in 2022, had 6 more in 2024 when he won a Super Bowl ring with the Eagles, started all those games for the Eagles when they won the Super Bowl, and yet teams just don't want him around. He started off with New Orleans, played 3 years there, went to Philly the first time, then to Detroit, then to Philly, and then started the journey that I already said. So this guy is he's just turned 28, but he has a problem with wearing out his welcome. He can't help himself apparently. So this guy is going to be intriguing to watch. I was on a Zoom call today. I'm a little disappointed because guys like this are great sound bites. Often they speak their minds. He doesn't seem like he wants to hold back, but he talks so fast it's hard to understand what he's saying. To which I don't know if he slows down while trash talking, because if this guy that I heard today talking was trash talking me on the field on Sundays, I'd be like, what are you even fucking saying? But did you listen to his Zoom?
I didn't, but I'm
Oh, okay.
aware of him and his persona and kind of where you're going or what you're referring to.
Yeah, but anyways, he was excited, maybe, meeting in the Bills media for the first time. But yeah, I think he's going to be a popular guy in the locker room. He seems to be guys who are big trash talkers like that and who are kind of unapologetic, have a tendency to be pretty good talkers. I'm thinking of Richie Incognito. Um, you know, well, maybe it's a short list. I mean, the Bills haven't had a ton of these guys recently who are just like, take me for what I am. I don't give a shit.
Well, it's a sport where, especially on that side of the ball, or maybe the offensive
Alec
line too.
Anderson. I mean, there's
Yeah,
some
well,
offensive linemen here. I'm trying to think.
that
Anyways,
he's an example of this, where a little bit of crazy is useful and helpful,
right.
and you can't have too much of it, and especially too many of the different guys, their crazy personalities can clash, and that can be problematic. But having some of that element uh, can be useful, and some would argue, I don't know if I believe this, but some would argue that the Bills went too far away from that in the past couple of years and had too much high character. I don't know if you can, but I've heard people make that argument that their valuing of high character players uh, led them away from some talent that they need. Also, there's a reason why they signed him to a 1-year deal, and there's a reason why he came a bit cheap, and those are the reasons that you outlined. But sometimes players like that get to points in their career where they recognize how they've, become journeymen and not sticking with teams, and maybe need to uh, tone down their act a little bit in order to stay in the league or stay under contract. So we'll see how that plays out. I think if this were a year ago or a couple of years ago and he was coming into a defense with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer and Tre'Davious White and Sean McDermott leading that defense and all the veteran presence and the way that the Bills developed their secondary members before, you would say, yeah, they'll get the best out of him. We don't know if all those dynamics are the same right now. Jim Leonard played safety, and maybe there's something there where he can figure out how to corral some of this oddball personality. I shouldn't describe it like that,
Maybe
but
first year coaches have a little trouble with that. I mean, or maybe maybe he responds to a younger coach. I mean, we don't know, but
yeah.
it could. Again, we're guessing. We're guessing, and that's part and parcel of having a first time head coach and a first time defensive coordinator. And we don't know. It's supposed to be a new day with the Bills, but right now it just seems like we're still guessing. The roster doesn't look much different. Now, that also lends itself to Terry Pagula thinking that they've had a contender. The roster has not been the problem. Therefore, maybe we don't need to do much. But then Brandon Beane was going after Trey Hendrickson and apparently Mike Evans and I don't know who else they've been in on and maybe fallen short. And usually you don't hear about those because teams don't want you to know. Um,
I'll tell you
but
what, if the Bills play the Tampa Bay Lightning, it seems like CJ Gardner-Johnson might be the type of player that they need for that matchup.
yeah, that'd be fun. Um, Before we talk about the Sabres, though, Jonah, let's talk about Mark Schmidt at St. Bonaventure. His career at St. Bonaventure ends today. Three NCAA tournament appearances, three NITs, two Atlantic 10 tournament titles, two Atlantic 10 regular season titles, about a 573 win percentage, 341 or 342 wins. He had 19 years at St. Bonaventure after 6 at Robert Morris. His career comes to an end today with a loss in the A10 tournament to Dayton. And I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonah, but those two wins, those two upset wins in the first couple rounds of the A10 tournament guaranteed that Mark Schmidt would not have a losing record, right? In his final season. Did he finish 500 or one game over?
I think they're over 500. I'd have to look up exactly what that, or 17-17 looks to be the record. So yeah, you are
Okay,
correct.
so he
And
doesn't go out a loser. Your thoughts on this surprising development? And I don't know if you want to get into it because I'm not familiar with it. I'll leave it out there though for people who do want to go check. There's been all kinds of rumors, and there's some outlets, media outlets that purport to have sources and report on Olean that there was a falling out and all kind. And was he fired? Was he? I don't know what you know about that. I'll leave it at that if that's where you want to stop. But it was a surprise that Mark Schmidt all of a sudden entering the A10 tournament was going to be done with the Bonnies.
I wasn't all that surprised. I do think it was an intriguing series of developments, and there's a lot of nuance here. And I don't know everything, but I do know some things, and I think I know more than some people and maybe less than some other people. But I think there's some people that think they really know the story and don't quite know all of the angles of it. And I don't know all of the angles of it, but I think I understand that there are a lot of angles and moving parts to this. I'll say this. I'm not surprised that Mark Schmidt Mark Schmidt has been talking about retirement for several years now. He talked about it on this podcast. He's talked about it.
Right
He's
before they announced Adrian
yeah,
Wojnarowski was being hired, and it kind of put the wind back in his sails.
right. He's alluded to it in public interviews. He's talked about it more directly in non-public settings. He's told people this would be his last contract. Now this contract went through one more season. There was a belief that with Adrian Wojnarowski coming in as the GM and taking over a lot of the recruiting and transfer portal, NIL negotiations, that would reinvigorate Mark Schmidt to just coach, and he might be more inclined to sign a new contract, coach beyond the duration of his contract. But from what I had been hearing and even some of the oblique references that he was making, it didn't sound to me like he was looking to extend his contract and coach beyond next season. I do think coming into this season, he still was under the belief that he would continue coaching into next season. I think they were expecting to do well this season, and they got off to a good start at 11-2. And at that point, he was probably thinking that he would be back next season and maybe coaching a lot of these same players coming back next season. But the wheels fell off early in the Atlantic 10 season. They lost their first 5 games, first time they'd ever done that under Mark Schmidt, league games. They lost at one point it was 6, and I think it ended up being more Atlantic 10 games where they had the lead in the last 5 minutes. So they weren't closing out games. They could have had a much better record if they had closed out some of those games a bit better. Ultimately finished as 13th seed in the Atlantic 10 conference and had to win these 2 tournament games to get to 500. So I think where the nuance comes in is I don't think this was a pure retirement, and I don't think it was a pure firing as some had explained it to be or described it as. And it's clearly not a firing. Mark Schmidt has come out and said he's retiring, so he's not getting fired. Now, has he been? Is it a bit of a negotiated retirement, somewhat of a mutual decision to part ways and being termed as a retirement? Perhaps it's somewhere in between a retirement and a dismissal. But I think it's wrong to say you have sources that say he was dismissed and now they're lying about it. Mark Schmidt is coming out and publicly saying he's retiring, and he had been talking about retiring. I think the Bona faithful, a lot in the Bona faithful, seem to be either ignoring or were never aware of how much Mark Schmidt had been contemplating retirement and talking about retirement and letting people know that that was coming within the next year or two or so. And it reminds me of the Marv Levy line. Once you start talking about retirement, you're kind of already retired. And I think one thing led to another here. As they struggled, having this coach that was peering out the window and thinking about the next stage of his life, maybe made it so, it wasn't tenable to go into one more season like that, that the retirement had to come sooner, and that, I do think there's been reports of some rifts and some professional frustrations. It does remind me somewhat of how things seem to break down between Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott. I don't think that there's as much nefarious animosity between Adrian Wojnarowski and Mark Schmidt as being portrayed in some media reports, but I don't think that they were in alignment over the roster.
Alignment.
And right, I don't think they had the perfect synergy this season, or maybe even all of the 2 seasons they've been together, to make this work and to get this right. As one coach explained to me, if Mark Schmidt doesn't like the players that Adrian Wojnarowski is recruiting for him, then he could have done his own recruiting, which he did for all of those years. Mark Schmidt was involved in bringing Adrian Wojnarowski in and setting up this situation where the GM does the recruiting and the coach does the coaching. It didn't work out perfectly this season, and I think that there's been some reckoning from all sides that going into next year, going into the future, something needed to change. And the coach who was already thinking, I maybe only got 1 year left, ended up getting shown the door and asked to take that retirement a year early. And he is getting some, if not all, of his buyout money. So that also makes it a little bit different than most retirements. Usually, if a coach steps away, he does not get all of the money owed to him on his contract. But I also think that if Mark Schmidt really wanted to coach next year, if Mark Schmidt wanted to renew his contract, I don't think St. Bonaventure would have fired him anyways. I think there was interplay here between a coach who wasn't quite sure how much longer he wanted to keep coaching, and then a university and athletic department that wasn't sure how much longer it wanted to continue with a coach that wasn't fully committed to coaching this team long term. And historically, with college basketball coaches, college coaches, a coach entering the last year of his contract, a lame duck year, doesn't have a new contract in place, it's difficult for that coach to recruit. It's difficult for that program to go forward with that and get players to commit to a program that aren't so sure how much longer the coach is going to be there. It's a little different now with college basketball when almost everybody is on a 1 year deal and it's a year-to-year situation with all of the players. But this also could have been a situation where it was like, well, we need Mark Schmidt to sign a contract extension, and without a contract extension, the lame duck year doesn't make a lot of sense. And one thing led to another, and it seemed to be mutually decided that it was best for Mark Schmidt to, and he might not be telling the total complete truth publicly, but he seems rather content with uh, being at this stage of his life and wanting to do other things and step away from coaching and uh, live the rest of his life.
What's the forecast for a replacement?
Well, the two names that have been floated out there that I think will both be candidates, but I'm not so sure they're slam dunk candidates, are Mike McDonald, the Damon University coach who has his team number 4 in the country and hosting the NCAA tournament, and happens to be a very close friend of Adrian Wojnarowski and a St. Bonaventure graduate. David Vanderpool, another St. Bonaventure graduate, former Bonaventure player, NBA assistant coach, would seem to be a good hire. Uh, I think they'll both be candidates and both get strong consideration. I'm not so sure that Bonaventure will land on either one of them as the coach that they hire. I
What
think
kind of
they'll,
attention does a job like that get? And it hasn't been open for a long time, but it's hard maybe to project, given the current college basketball landscape, what St. Bonaventure means with NIL and everything, as opposed to when that job was open with Mark Schmidt. What was it, 19 years ago?
Yeah, well, it's Atlantic 10, which isn't a power league, but it's one of the better basketball leagues. So coaches coaching in smaller Division One leagues will mostly be interested, at least in taking a look at that job. A lot of coaches will look at the NIL resources and where they slot within the league. And as UB found a couple of years ago, when these coaches don't think that you have the NIL resources in place to be competitive in your league, they might not be interested in taking this job. Adrian Wojnarowski, one of the big projects he's had to undertake as general manager is to try to raise money for the NIL collective or work with the NIL collectives when they can do. They're also in the revenue sharing program. They don't make a whole lot of revenue, but they are trying to utilize that. What I think is going to be an interesting dynamic here is that Mark Schmidt was making uh, a large salary, one of the highest paid coaches in the Atlantic 10, and it was largely funded by Bonaventure donors. There's a belief now, and I think this is true, that they're going to try to pay the coach a smaller salary and use some of that donation money or a lot of that donation money to pay players through the NIL collectives. And that makes sense, but that might limit certain types of coaches or certain coaches, like David Vanterpool, for example, might be making more money in his current NBA assistant job than what Bona's trying to pay their next head coach. Or Bobby Hurley, I think, is an interesting name to where he just got let go from Arizona State and is probably going to coach again, but maybe going to have to drop down to a level. You know, Adrian Wojnarowski has a relationship with the Hurley family. Could there be a conversation to be had there? But how much money does Bobby Hurley want to make as a coach? How much does St. Bonaventure want to pay its next coach? If they get a good head coach for $500,000, and let's say that's, you know, $1.5 million less than they were paying Mark Schmidt, and they can put $1 million plus into the NIL collective, they can maybe get a better roster, and maybe some coaches will be more attracted to having that NIL money to work with as opposed to money in their pocket as a salary. So there's a lot of different dynamics going on here with the money and the finances. And Adrian Wojnarowski, maybe he can find a new corporate deal as he's tried to do before to inject some more money into the program with a new coach or a new mission and a new direction.
Yeah, big difference between Tempe, Arizona, and Olean, New York. But as you mentioned, Adrian Wojnarowski, close to that family from his time in New Jersey, and wrote a book about Bobby Hurley's father in the school. And really, when you wrote about the kids also. So yeah, he knows those guys.
And I think Mike McDonald specifically could be an excellent hire. He's a very good coach. He's done a very good job at Damon with less resources in that program than the other high-level nationally ranked Division II programs that they're competing with and winning at that level. He's a Bonaventure guy. I don't think it's going to take a very large salary to get him to take that job. But and I think if that is the hire, I think that could be a very good hire and a very good fit, and it could work very well. But I'm just not so sure with all of the public scrutiny and criticism that Adrian Wojnarowski has taken over the Mark Schmidt departure and the fact that this isn't a pure, you know, Adrian Wojnarowski, from my understanding, I could be wrong about this as it's developed over time, but he's not the president of basketball operations the way Brandon Beane is running the Bills right now. I don't think he has the ultimate hammer to decide the head coach. The athletic director and the school president and the board of trustees will be involved in this search. And it might not look good for Adrian Wojnarowski to hire, his old college buddy and good friend. And it might not look good for the university to allow that to happen, even if Mike McDonald is the best coach or one of the best coaches for the job. The optics of it might prevent that from happening.
Yeah, Mike McDonald was asked about it. I saw it on a couple of broadcasts and people previewing the Damon Wildcats entering their conference tournament. Local TV stations had him on camera, and might as well ask him about it while you're at it. So he was commenting about it. I think he's sounded like he'd be interested in it and would do well at it. But like you say, the optics could be an issue. But he is a St. Bonaventure grad too, so it's he's earned it, and he is one of them. He's a part of the tribe. So,
and if the PR aspect of Mark Schmidt's retirement was handled a little better, if they had been more ahead of the story. If Mark Schmidt had said earlier in the season that this would be his last season coaching before rumors started to come out that he was going to be dismissed, that might change, that might have changed the PR dynamics going into this next hire.
Before we wrap up, we have to talk about the Sabres. They suffered a loss to Washington last night to end their post-Olympic win streak at 8 games. Man, these guys are impressive and they're fun to watch. Thursday night's game notwithstanding, it was 2-1, but there were still some fun moments. And, Tage Thompson with his 5 power play one-timers in the span of how many seconds do you know, Jonah? Was it 13 seconds or maybe not quite that, but it was something ridiculous. It was fun to watch. And I know that some people are saying it was terrible strategy on a power play. First off, the guy goes to the bench. He's having the time of his life. Why not? I mean, what else is he going to do? I mean, come on.
Yeah, it was fun to be there for the way the crowd picked up on that, and it was mostly Sabres fans cheering Tage Thompson and how exciting that was to watch. But I also think there were some Capitals fans there cheering for the goaltender making all of those saves, and that was
Yeah, it was a great
just kind
sequence
of
of hockey.
fun. Yeah, it was fun to watch someone take all those shots and then a goalie stand up to it.
So you've been at these games, Jonah. I mean, is there anything really to say? I know that they get talked about a lot. I know that hockey is back when I can tell you who's on the fourth line, and I know the defense pairs. I'm not just watching casually like I used to. I can, the trade deadline was fun. I agreed with the moves. Um, I don't know where you're around this team. What's your take on the atmosphere at
Well,
KeyBank Center and these in the locker room?
first, let me say this might turn into one of the all-time regrets of my career, in that I went to cover Damon's East Coast Conference Championship victory on Sunday. Got caught up a little late there with cutting down the nets and the post-game press conference and lingering around to talk to Mike McDonald a little bit. And I had originally planned to get down to the Sabres game, but I was at Damon longer than I thought I would be. Then got out of there and decided, I hustled down. It's going to be the second period by the time I get there. And then I'm listening to all this happen on the radio, which was a fun listen. Dan Dunleavy with a great call throughout that game. But I thought, well, here I missed all the action. There's not going to be too much more in the second and third period worth going down there for. And I was wrong about that. And that was fun to watch on television, but that's going to be a game that everybody that was there as a fan and also the media is going to always remember. And 20 years later, be doing oral histories and pointing back and saying, I was at that game, and I'm not going to be able to say that. But I have been at all the other home games, and they've been great atmosphere. Sabres have sold out 10 straight games, 16 sellouts this season after only 4 last season. The energy and the aura is back at KeyBank Center. It's been back for a while now. Sabres are playing and performing as the best team in hockey over a 3-month span. They did lose last night, but won 8 in a row before that, 8 straight in regulation. First place in the Atlantic Division, which it wasn't unfathomable when they were in last place that they could get back in the playoff race, but I think it was unfathomable that they could be leading the division and 2 points out of the Eastern Conference lead as they were last night before last night's loss. And being in last place and now being close to first place is quite the in-season turnaround. And yeah, I forget what your question was, but yeah, it does seem like
The
they made some.
atmosphere around the locker room and just being around. And all right, how about this? You were there last night
Yeah, yeah.
and were you in the locker room after the game?
I was in the post game, a little bit in the locker room, but more so with Lindy. I mean, it was a subdued atmosphere
Yeah, well,
post
let me
game
ask you about
yesterday.
this. It's a loss, and do the losses feel how much different does a loss feel when they've been winning so much
Well,
than
the
maybe 3 months ago?
the Sabres were expressing some disappointment in the loss and missed opportunities and not thinking they played their best hockey. And they did have more shots, and I think they felt like they should have converted some opportunities, specifically maybe that power play with Tage Thompson getting all those open looks and won that game, and they let it slip away. They also had some turnovers in their own zone that led to late goals that cost them the game. But I think that after all of those wins, you can't win night after night after night, every game. You can't play your best hockey every single night. That there was going to be nights when they were going to lose. They were going to lose to a team that had more desperation to get a win at some point, and they weren't doing that. There were a lot of games I've covered over the past few weeks where I thought, okay, this is the game where the Sabres lose, and they came out and they didn't even, they walked the team up and down the ice. So it was going to happen eventually, and I think not to say the Sabres shouldn't be disappointed themselves or Lindy Ruff shouldn't be disappointed with the way they play, but he had to accept that this was going to happen at some point, and you can't really hang your head too much over one bad night. Also, the Sabres had some weird stuff going on last night with the lineup. Alex Tuck not playing because of a minor injury, integrating some of these new players, shuffling up all the lines and the defensive pairs.
Yeah, Luke Shen and Logan Stanley did not look too swift out there together on
Right, and
defense.
the whole team seemed a little bit out of sync or less in sync than they had been over this 8-game win streak. And usually you make these lineup changes after you've been losing to try to shake things up for various reasons. The Sabres did that last night, and it seemed to take them not like into a bad game, but out of their best game for at least a night.
Yeah. Yeah. That's they've been fun to watch, and they're relevant times 10.
Yeah, and speaking of atmospheres, it'll be very interesting to see and listen to what
Toronto.
the atmosphere is Saturday night against the Toronto Maple Leafs. With all these sellouts the Sabres have been having, will they still have quite so many Maple Leaf fans in the building? Will the Maple Leaf fans be as enthused about coming down here to watch the game and cheer on their team with Toronto in last place and Austin Matthews getting
You have
injured?
the geopolitical stuff going on too, Jonah. So I know that when people are wondering about what the atmosphere is going to be like, and I know they've been talking about it quite a bit on WGR, and I've seen it on social media, people wondering, that gets left out of the discussion. I think that the Maple Leafs aren't as good, of course, and Canadians in general don't want to cross the border. And it's something that we've seen and I've written about, and I've actually done the data. I wish I had it in front of me. I don't, but they aren't coming nearly as much as they did for Maple Leafs games in the past when the Leafs were good. In fact, there was a game last season, or maybe it was the season before, but I think it was last season where the Leafs could clinch, and I'm talking about border traffic. You can't. I don't have the breakdown of how many are in the stadium, or excuse me, a KeyBank Center, but the traffic coming over the bridge on those days was down like 40% for a normal Maple Leafs game. Anyways, so that's
Yeah,
something to consider too. So Sabres fans might be in those seats.
yeah, right. In terms
Although
of demand.
The Canadiens games had quite a bit of a
Yeah,
Montreal
and
flavor
the
to them.
last time Toronto was here, there was a lot of Maple Leafs fans, and Austin Matthews scored his 60th goal here last year, and it was a
That's what I
huge
was thinking
cheer
of.
from the
That is
crowd.
60th, and
Um,
it was, yeah,
yes,
and they clinched, I think.
right. And I went to the game a month or so ago in Toronto when the Sabres, won that game, scored a lot of goals, played really well. There weren't very many Sabres fans there, although the handful that were there could be heard, and the one or two that threw a hat on the ice when Rasmus Dahlin got his hat trick were there. But what the change in demand has been, oftentimes over the years, it's been Sabre season ticket holders selling their tickets to Maple Leafs fans from over the border because they can make so much money. But now you might see some Southern Ontario fans that have Sabres season tickets not as interested in going to this game and selling them to Sabres fans
Right.
that are looking for tickets, or even people that bought this game, Toronto Maple Leafs fans that bought this tickets for this game weeks or months ago and now aren't as interested in going and selling to Sabres fans who a month or two ago weren't thinking about going to games and really want to get into the building for this game. So I think there's going to be a split crowd either way, but it might swing a little bit back towards a Buffalo crowd than the last time Toronto played here.
Anything else to discuss, Jonah, before we wrap it up?
No, I mean, the Bandits game tonight, so there'll be another Rockets crowd there, and they already got the hardwood in the back to put the NCAA court out there next week for March Madness. So if you, arena sports entertainment. If you work there, if you somehow you get into the arena for all of the events, it's a exciting week. Or if you're a media person that gets to cover this all, there's a lot going on. Bandits won back-to-back games last week to get back to 500 and back in the playoff picture, and made a interesting trade. Traded for Joe Resiteras from Hamburg, the all-time leading U.S.-born scorer in indoor lacrosse history, and I think he was first or second leading scorer in the NLL last season. So he should help them make a playoff push at the end of the season.
Dig it. Thanks to everybody for watching and listening. Tim let's 3, 2. Thanks to everybody for watching or listening to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I tried not to sneeze right into the microphone or blow my snot locker too loud, but we're grateful for you. Please subscribe, comment, like us, rate us, do whatever you can to help push us to greater heights. Jonah, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to get one more thought from you. What do you think about Bam Adebayo's 83-point game the other night?
Yeah, I'm not that impressed. Against a team that's tanking. How many free throws did he make? 30?
43.
43. Okay.
Attempts, 43 free throw attempts.
Yeah, it was like, he made them, right?
Yeah.
36 or 37 of them. Damn impressive. But no, well, you're a basketball guy. Is it one of the greatest feats in basketball history or what?
Well, no. There's a lot of, as you mentioned, the Washington Wizards being a tanking team and the way that game unfolded late and the number of fouls that were called and things like that. But it does strike me as interesting that a guy can score 83 points in an NBA game and we're yawning and saying, that's nothing.
Well, it's like if Shohei Ohtani, well, no, not Shohei Ohtani, just pick a above average baseball player, but the other team is throwing a position player for the entire game and somebody ends up with 4 or 5 home runs, you'd be like, it wouldn't be the same as, Bob Horner or Rocky Colavito doing it.
Yeah, well, and he's not a super high scoring player. And someone did the math on standard deviations. This would be like Patrick Mahomes throwing for 915 yards based on, career averages.
All right, Jonah, thanks for this. Thanks to everybody out there for supporting us. This is Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants.